On today's University of Arizona Futures in Digital Learning podcast, we bring you a conversation with Dr. Rob Steffen, an associate professor of practice in the Department of Religious Studies and Classics at the University of Arizona, as we explore the faculty perspective of online course design.
You just get a huge array of different strategies and assignments and technologies and ways to organize web pages. And that's something that we don't get enough of just as instructors.
Join us as we discuss practical steps for designing your first online course, methods for student engagement, and the benefits of working with an instructional designer. Hello, everybody, and welcome to this month's edition of the Futures in Digital Learning podcast. I am Adam Davi, an instructional design manager, and I'm here with my co-host, Brian Hale. Brian, if you can, go ahead and say hello.
Hey, everybody. How y'all doing? I'm Brian Hale, an instructional designer with the UCAT department.
Excellent. Thank you, Brian, for mentioning that we are now UCAT. Been that way officially for a couple months now. And we are joined today by Dr. Rob Steffen, Associate Professor of Practice in the Department of Religious Studies and Classics.
You got it. That's perfect.
Excellent. So thank you, Rob, for joining us today. We appreciate it.
Hey, well, thanks, Adam. Thanks, Brian. I really appreciate the invite. And I always enjoy talking about these things.
So Rob has, he's worked with us on quite a few classes for Arizona Online, and he and I have worked together on quite a few, building out some really cool courses and really engaging courses for students as well. So we're excited to talk to him about the course design process and get a little bit of faculty perspective of what it's like to design an online course. So first things first, when you get tasked with designing an online course, what's your first step?
All right, so I think my first step is actually, I'm envisioning what this is going to look like to the students, right? I almost see trying to think through a screenshot in my head. What are they going to see? And then everything else is going to kind of flow out from there, right? So is the look of this going to be like a talk show? Is it going to look like a news report? Is it going to look like a National Geographic show or a sports show? And that's kind of I'm not really sure that's where you're supposed to be starting with it. That's where I start with it, with the kind of visualizing what I want this thing to look
like. I think that's a unique approach, but I think that's a cool way to think about it, because it's 7.5 weeks, right? So it's a real short amount of time to grab your students' attention and hold it and get them hooked.
And right? Honestly, for me, that's one of the parts that's super exciting, right? To try to design these things in an engaging way in a world where students are sitting there, they're by nature hooked up to the internet when they're engaging with the class. Right? Meaning that 2 clicks away is all the knowledge and entertainment the world has ever put together and has to offer. And so the challenge then, right, is how do you create something that's both educational, educationally productive, but also engaging enough that they're not going to take those 2 other clicks. And for me personally, a lot of the fun has been kind of learning some of the technology, video production or slide production or whatever it is, to try to take whatever that kind of visualization is and then make it come to life. And that's one of those things, on the very few days where I actually have a full day to work on something like that, you start working on it at 7:30, 8 a.m. and then all of a sudden it's 5 and you don't even know that any time has gone by, just because you've been knee deep in trying to figure out whatever the special effects are you want for transitioning between different parts of the video or the lecture.
Yeah.
How far ahead do you, when you come up with an idea, whatever course you're teaching, I want it to have an Indiana Jones archaeology theme. How far ahead do you actually start planning and working on the course before it goes live?
For me, it's somewhere between 6 months and a year. In my more recent versions where I've really tried to up the production value, I mean, I think it's well over 100 hours, and it's got to be 200 to 400 hours of work that goes into one of these things, between scripting it, between filming it. The editing is just unfathomably time consuming. And as you do it, you get better at you can get some time gains on some of it, right? Like you'll get better marginally as you go, but you bump up against something where it's like, it is just going to take that amount of time. And I can do it no quicker than that. And it's a tough enough thing where I've got like this kind of picture in my head that's specific enough that it's hard to like outsource it, right? Like if I just had like a template that I could give to a graduate student and say, hey, we're going to pay you a bunch of money, go make these slides look like this, it would be great, but I think you lose something. So I would say at the very least, I would give it about a year between like committing to having that course run on the books and starting in on the actual work.
And that's, great. And I wish, I wish a lot of professors, and faculty members would devote that time as well, because, like I said, you have come up with some really innovative and frankly cool ways to reach students. I'm wondering, like, what has been the student response to some of your courses, and what do they say they like, and what kind of feedback have you gotten?
So it's really interesting that we didn't plan this out ahead of time, but this leads exactly into a talk I recently gave, which is trying to gauge kind of the impact of whatever the extra polish on a class is. One of my colleagues, Dr. Caleb Simmons, is working on something similar as well. But essentially the question's, right, like if the content stays the same, right, and you just start to change some of the kind of visual or aesthetic elements, first of all, do students notice at all, right? Do they care at all? And if so, what are the different aspects of it that they pick out or they kind of latch on? And so I gave a talk last week that was looking back at 6 years worth of course evaluations, student course evaluations, and then trying to map those on to kind of the different versions of courses that I've produced, right? So everything from like the early days of, you've got the PowerPoint on the screen, and then you've got like the dreaded disembodied voice narrating it, and it goes on for like 39 minutes. And so that was like, whatever, my lowest kind of style. And then I started scripting some of those things. I had the Arizona Online Studio as like one of the kind of versions of production, and then kind of the newer like scripted Adobe Premiere, kind of more History Channel or National Geographic style courses that I've worked on. And I grouped them into those four and tried to see, like, when you look at questions across those categories and across a bunch of different sections, can you actually see noticeable or significant differences? And like all research, the answer is like, it's complicated. But students do seem to pick up on it, right? Like those two versions, like the Arizona Online Studio, which is unscripted, but in a very kind of professional setting, and those kind of scripted, but like Adobe Premiere versions, there's a significant break in the different scores between those two versions and the kind of narrated PowerPoints. Okay. And what I was trying to do actually was look at that across a couple different categories of questions, right? So one's like the how much did you enjoy the course question, and one's like how much did you learn question. One was about clarity, and then one looked at free responses, right? When they write about what they enjoy about the class, I was looking at how frequently, what percentage of students comment on the lectures themselves. What I was really surprised about, I thought the answer was going to be like, they do notice, and it's going to come across in kind of whatever the overall satisfaction is, right? Overall course score, maybe the interest in the class, that sort of thing. And it does a little bit, right? But it actually comes across, when I ran all the things over 6 years with, dozens of different sections of courses, it was their own like self-perception of learning that you see the strongest correlation between kind of the production quality of the course and the student ratings. Right. So I was super surprised about that. And again, it's important to like kind of caveat that that's like their perception of their own learning. Right. It's not actually measuring like, did they improve on tests or projects or something like that. But still, I thought it was going to come across more strongly in like interest or satisfaction rather than self-perceived learning. And it was a pretty big difference numerically on this.
That's interesting. I actually recently just I was reading a book, and it talked about a study similar to kind of what you were saying about students' perception of learning. And they looked at a course that was lecture-based versus more active learning, and students rated, they thought that they learned more in the lecture-based course as opposed to the active learning course. The actual like results of their assessments showed the opposite, right? That they learned more in the active development versus the lecture based. But their perception was that, oh, they're gaining more knowledge sitting and listening to the professor talk.
I could totally imagine that, right? Like,
Yeah.
you think back to watching like a History Channel special on the pyramids and everything that went into it, right? And you just feel like you're learning a lot.
Right.
And then, if the activity is go like draw a pyramid and the different steps it took to create it, you're like, this is what kids do, right?
You're right.
And I can totally imagine that you actually kind of internalize it more doing the active based thing.
Yeah.
But yeah, part of what I'm doing with those things is, in the type of things that I teach, which tend to be ancient history, archaeology, ancient Egypt, Greece, Rome, that sort of thing.
Yeah.
The vast majority of students that I'm interacting with at kind of the gen ed level are students who are maybe interested in it, but in large part in that course because it's fulfilling one of their university requirements.
Right.
And so, a big part of what I want them to take away is just like walking away more interested in whatever the topic was and just kind of different cultures more broadly than they came into the class, right? And so if they walk away and even if the kind of whatever the learning, the factual learning isn't perfect, if it makes them want to go to Egypt or like learn something else about it, pick up a book or watch a documentary, hey, I'm super happy about that.
Yeah, that's a win, right?
Absolutely.
Yeah. Excellent. So, thinking about that and the difference between an online course and a face-to-face course, like what are the biggest challenges in trying to, not necessarily like replicate what you do in person, but translate and get that engagement going in an asynchronous online course?
Yeah, the toughest thing in terms of like design is by far having to think through like everything, right? Like not like every instruction, every question that students might have, and somehow getting that online in a comprehensive way that's not just completely overwhelming, right?
Right.
The student doesn't want to have to read through 4,000 words to figure out what the assignment is that they're supposed to do. And so much of that in-person course can be done verbally, right? You can put in the 100-word description of what they're supposed to do, and every question, right, they raise their hand and you answer it the best you can, and then somebody else is like, oh, well, what does actually does that mean? And you go from there. And that is in an asynchronous online course, you just have to get all that on the page somewhere. And that's kind of by far the biggest challenge. And especially the courses I teach tend to be very large during the kind of fall and winter, or sorry, fall and spring semesters, where it's like, 300 to 900 students or something. And so if something's not right, like if you miss something in there, you're going to hear about it. And you're not just going to hear about it once. You're going to hear about it like 75 times in email form, right? And you want to respond to all the emails in a kind and considerate way, and you want to make sure everybody's on the same page. But it's a time-consuming endeavor.
Right.
You miss part of that. So that's more like, it's a little bit less about the last part of your question in terms of kind of engagement and interactivity and stuff like that. But that's the immediate thing that jumps out to me, is trying to think like, how do I get all the different questions answered?
Right.
And put this thing in an as clear as possible way. When an in-person class, like you can just kind of riff on it, right? Like if students want to go in a different direction, you can just be like, okay, yeah, that sounds great. Great idea. Go with it.
Yeah.
And you start trying to adjust on the fly in an online course. And at least at that scale, it's super tough.
I tell instructors when I work with them to put information in 3 different places in D2L, because you just can't predict where students are going to look for it, right?
Totally.
And a lot of times they're like, well, isn't that repetitive? Isn't that like more work? And I'm like, trust me, it'll save you work later. in the form of, like you said, responding to emails, right? So maybe you're getting 75 emails, could have been getting 150.
So back when we started working together, I took that, like, that was a nice little quip you had that I took to heart, right?
Yeah.
But I did it wrong. And what I did was I totally put everything in 3 different places, right? But I'd have the PDF file in 3 different places. And so then when I revamped the course, right, anytime I change an assignment, I'm trying to remember which 3 places I actually put this somewhere. And like sometimes like 3 years later, I'll get an email from the student, like, asking a question about, I've emailed my TA. They say they're not the TA for the course anymore. Like, what's going on? And I'm like, well, what are you talking about, right? I clearly have the TAs laid out where I know they're like where the file is, right? And it's buried somewhere under like attachment to an assignments tab or a weird link, like on a discussion thread or something like that. And it totally does go to the TAs from 3 years ago.
Yeah.
And so now I'm trying to go back and make sure that every file only lives in there once.
Yeah.
And that everything else is all links to help with that sort of thing. And that's actually where I think some of the web design things, like I'm going to really start trying to rely on like these kind of Adobe Express pages where like the link can always stay the same. Right?
Yeah.
And I just have to update the actual page itself.
Yeah.
Don't have to worry about where any of the other links are. They can stay exactly the same, and it just updates it for everybody automatically.
That's great. I'd love to elaborate on that a little bit, because I know you're part of our inaugural Adobe Fellows cohort that our amazing Adobe team has put together here at the University of Arizona. And so, utilizing something like you said, Creative Cloud Express, right, where the link stays static. But
exactly, right. So this was something I did over the summer. So it was in July, led by Alex Gonzalez, who's one of the kind of lead Adobe evangelist here.
Yeah.
And what we did over the course of 2 weeks was essentially go through not all of, but a good handful of the different products of the Adobe suite. And what they did just a phenomenal job of was being able to take what's super powerful software, especially when you get into things like Photoshop and Illustrator, Premiere, and like be able to give you a 30-minute tutorial on something with a couple files that you download as assets, you upload them, you follow their steps, and by the end of like an hour, you've got something that looks super professional. And that's something that when you open Adobe Premiere, you do not like it does not look intuitive. And it looks like it's going to take you ages to figure out how to do anything. To be able to walk away after half an hour, and have something super polished was just great. But one of the big takeaways, getting back to your question, was like one of the things we did very early on was look at the Creative Cloud Express kind of website builder. And it's essentially just a module website builder where it gives you kind of a very limited number of options in terms of what you can do. But it trades off, and what you get in return is it's super simple and intuitive and easy to create. Right? So you've got one of 3 or 4 options for what you want each box to do. You choose that. You can have images, you can have text, and for the amount of effort that goes in, you walk away with a really polished and nice looking product. And so the thinking in terms of how to integrate this thing is to start having things that I change frequently. So assignment sheets, right? Like I get feedback on what works well, what doesn't work well, and I want to go back in and tweak the exact language on there to make it as effective and engaging as possible.
Right.
But if I put that PDF in 3 different places,
right.
I've got to make sure I know exactly where those are. So the goal now is to just have a single static link in all 3 places, go into the underlying file itself, make whatever changes I need, and just know that whatever I'm looking at on my page is the exact same thing that the students are looking at as well.
And you don't have to worry about creating a new file and re-uploading a new file every time. Like if something has a date on it that's for an older semester, like that just confuses students, and they have that old file. And
it brings back old memories of like, I don't know, 2017, 18, whenever we started working together, right? I
Yeah.
wanted to give my students as much information as possible. So
Yeah.
I'd be like, in the text part of like writing an HTML like assignment sheet or something, and I'd be like, dude, remember this is due this Wednesday, like November 12th, 2017. Sure enough, when I move the shell over to the next semester, it's still Wednesday, November 12th, 2017.
Yeah.
Got a lot of emails on that one.
Yeah. It's easy to overlook those things, but I'm glad that you brought up, just kind of integrating those new tools and also, kind of working collaboratively with different aspects of our team. I guess my next question just kind of, and you've touched on this a little bit, but how is working with an instructional designer helpful to you as a faculty member in designing online courses?
So I'll answer this for me personally, right? Well, I'll answer it broadly to begin with, right? I think as an instructor, right, there's such a different range of kind of like technological capabilities you come into this with, just kind of general web savvy, technology savvy, that sort of thing. I think in large part, what this does is it gets everybody kind of up to a certain level of quality, right? And I think that especially right now where online stuff is growing so quickly. And you look at some of the courses I've seen over the course of a long period of time, right? I've seen courses where it's like, you never see the professor, not like in person, just like a picture of them or a video of them, like anything. You never hear them, right? Like there's no audio. It's just like, here's the file of PDFs. Here's the assignments, and like read through the PDFs and then do the assignments. And that's it, right? And so I think that, one of the important roles is it gives us kind of a baseline level of quality that I think, we can all feel good about. I love this stuff. I genuinely enjoy tinkering around with these things, and playing around with new technologies and that sort of thing. So for me personally, the huge benefit has been getting a sense for like what other people are doing. And like, because you work with so many different people, you just get a huge array of like, different strategies and assignments and technologies and ways to organize web pages. And that's something that like we don't get enough of just as instructors. Right? We're buried enough in teaching our own courses and doing our own research and serving on however many committees. And we really don't. We don't get enough time like, just checking out somebody else's course. And so the kind of moments that really stuck out to me, that being able to come in and say like, what cool stuff do you have for me, right? And like, what have you been seeing from all the people you've been working with? And you being able to take me through a half dozen different D2L pages and show me some different assignments and activities and say, oh, well, this thing that this person in music is doing, right? Like I know that's in music over there, but that's actually going to look great for your assignment on whatever writing in Mesopotamia.
It's interesting that you bring that up, because one of our kind of big projects in our office is to build out a showcase of things that instructors have done and instructional designers have done, that is, more outward facing. Because I think all of us individually as IDs have our little go-tos, like, here are some examples we can show instructors, but we don't necessarily like share that with each other either. And how many more cool things are out there that, I'm sharing this small subset of stuff that I've seen with you, right? But wouldn't it be great if I could then also share what everybody else is doing too? So
I love the idea, right? Like there'll certainly be challenges with it because it all comes in different, like kind of technology, like software packages, right? But man, one day if you want a long-term project, right, being able to put together kind of a database of greatest hits of these sorts of things where I can go and search and say, I want something on writing assignments, and I want it to be primary source based, and I want like video engagement, right? Whatever. Click the three boxes, then boom, I've got like 5 different awesome ones that pop up, and I can go through them. I mean,
that's the vision.
that would be a phenomenal resource to have.
Yeah. So, and I think I'm really glad that you kind of brought that up as something helpful that IDs can bring to the table, because I think a lot of times, people think, oh, well, they're good. They can help me write my learning outcomes, or they can help me, put something on D2L or whatever learning management system I'm using. But sometimes it's just the brainstorming of it too.
And, I mean, that's all important
great.
stuff too. But for me, it's the information sharing, right?
Mm-hmm.
Like you think about how many faculty we have here, and like just how much awesome stuff is going on all the time in all these corners of the university. And I don't even get to talk to my own like colleagues in my department enough and go into their online courses and see what they're doing. Just because we're so busy. So I certainly don't have the opportunity to go check out what people in astronomy are doing or something like that. And, but you do. Or you may not have the time for it, but you have to do it anyway. And
right.
So I mean, it's been an excellent resource to be able to have you kind of facilitate those interactions.
Awesome.
Let me ask a quick question about your own personal motivation for the course. How do you find time to stay motivated when you're teaching, when you're building a new course with all of your other responsibilities that you have? How do you pencil that into your day?
In some ways, it's like finding time. So, I'm a professor of practice who focuses more exclusively on teaching. But I imagine it's kind of similar to, tenured track faculty finding time for research, where, if you're doing, 3 different live in-person courses and you're on committees, it's unlikely to happen, right? And what I found is that I'm kind of constantly searching for ways to lock in, I guess what I call like efficiency gains, right? So one of the great things is once you've got, your first version of classical mythology, and it's like, okay, it's good and it can run, right? Like you run the class and then what you can do is the next year when you run that, then you can use the time that you would normally be spending in front of the classroom to start on version 2.0. And so it's not going to actually be active the second time you run it, right? You're kind of using some of the time you would spend actually lecturing now in course development. But then it can run in, the following year, right? The third year, you can actually run them. So that's one way I've been trying to do that. The other way is, especially in these very, very large courses, continually trying to find ways to make kind of this army of TAs and graders work in an efficient way and not have to kind of re-explain everything every time, right? So like, essentially, I'll get enough questions where one time I just sat down and for like 3 days, I wrote, a 20-page guide to how to be a TA or something. And for those 3 days, I didn't get anything else done. I had no time for anything. So for me personally, I need kind of blocks and chunks of time to do it. And so I kind of strategically try to put some of my in-person courses and have them overlap in a given semester or a 7-week thing or something like that. And then take the other 7-week semester, teach an online course. And while that's running, be working on the revisions for the following year.
Very cool. So let me ask this then. What advice would you have for faculty who are designing their very first online course?
What I would try to do, let me think about that for a second.
Should you dream big, or should you dream big and then kind of cross out some of the more grandiose things and kind of scale it back, so you're not like George Lucasing your Star Wars later on?
First version, right? If you've never built an online course before, 100% the second thing, right? What you're trying to look for is whatever that perfect balance is between having it look nice and cool and professional and also like relatively labor intensive. If you find a nice place to record and you can build some good looking slides, I mean, the standard Panopto thing of putting you in the corner and having your slides behind you, it can look good, right? And it looks better if your webcam's not jostling around. And it looks better if you have a nice bookcase behind you instead of, I don't know, a giant window where light's crashing in behind you or something like that. But that's a totally fine starting point. For me, the kind of perfect balance between not much added labor, but a lot added in terms of like polish, was kind of using some video game streaming software to put a green screen behind myself, and then kind of in a Adobe Photoshop sort of way, you can layer the different inputs that the camera is capturing, right? So I could put my, I actually had like an office looking thing behind me. And then on that image, I had a screen next to it. And then I could have the actual slides show up on the screen. And then I could layer myself on top of that. And so it kind of looks like I'm in an office with the screen next to me and I can point to it. It's really just a green screen behind me.
Right.
And the slideshow is just a PowerPoint slideshow, right? So I'm just clicking as I'm going and
Right.
talking. You know, you spend half a day designing whatever you want the background image to look like. And the rest of it's, you know, an extra 10 minutes setting it up and making sure things are layered the right way. And you get a pretty polished looking effect, right? Like, you know, go on YouTube or Twitch or something like that, and you got plenty of streamers out there. And my thinking was like, if this little 13-year-old nerd can do this and make $4 million a year, certainly I can do this for one of my courses.
That's true, right? It's, you know, sometimes the kids make it look so easy and you're like,
They
wait
totally
a minute,
do.
I can do this. So, but I think that's what you said is important to emphasize too, to instructors, is that the first run of the course isn't a final product and it doesn't have to be perfect. Like, you can always go back and tinker with things and change things. And
yeah, and I would say it doesn't even not just have to be perfect. Like, in no way will it even possibly be perfect.
Right.
Like, you could put whatever 1 million hours into that first run, and you're gonna find things that, you know, 2 years later you hate about it. You know, I remember one of the early courses I was putting together was before I had ever worked with like the Adobe products. So I was doing it all in PowerPoint. But I was like going deep into the animations, right? So you could kind of get like a Ken Burns panning and zooming effect. And then you go and you like build all of those in, and then you record it with the narration and it's timing the slides. And it's still like, you know, for a PowerPoint narration at the time, like, looked good. But it's still like, whenever I would go between slides, it would like lose like the first 2 seconds or 3 seconds of audio at the beginning and the end of each slide. So everything in the middle sounds good.
Yeah.
But I mean, it doesn't matter. You know, I put a ton of time into that, and still like 2 years later, it's obsolete.
Yeah. Well, you know, I mean, in 1975, when Jaws came out, that shark was terrifying, right? And now you look at it and you're like, people thought that looked real. You know, but it's still cool. It's still cool. But yeah, it's, you know, things have changed and adapted. So yeah.
Absolutely. I mean, the other thing I would say, like, that's how I would conceive of like whatever the content delivery mechanism is. You know, try to strike that nice balance between feasibility and time investment and polish. But the other big thing is, I would say, really try to like repetitive in a good way, right? So that from module to module, students are doing the same.
Yeah.
And this is another thing I found is so much easier to get away from in an in-person class, because you can frame everything just as you're talking to them and what's coming up next week and all that stuff. And, you know, I've just found that for especially the asynchronous online courses, you know, allowing them to get into a rhythm where they know each module, they're like, you know, they're going to watch some lectures, they're going to do a quiz, they're going to read some secondary sources and some primary sources. They're going to do some like active, you know, some sort of activity where they're, you know, drawing or modeling or video producing or something like that. And then also write up something in text form. Like, if they know those are the 6 things they're going to do each week or each module, it takes them a module and a half or 2 to get into it. And by 3, they're rolling right along. Yeah.
That's key for online students to have that consistency, because, you know, I think for our population, especially at Arizona Online, like, most of them are not full-time students, right? They're working, they have families, they have other obligations. So having that consistency as well to be able to build that into their already busy schedules is helpful for their own success as well. So that's a great thing to build into your courses.
Yeah. I mean, I like, out of, and you know, there's a million things that like pieces of advice, but I think it's like, that would be the other big one for me.
Yeah.
Really keep a very similar kind of model from module to module and organize it in a way that's like, I don't know, breaks things down a little bit for students. I think D2L has some room for growth on this. In the sense of like, you know, when you go into a module, what you've got is you can drag all the files or links or assignments or whatever in there. And what it gives you is a laundry list of like, 14 blue links.
Yeah.
And it's tough to make sense of it, right? And especially when some of them you drag an assignment in, and if you put the actual text of the assignment in the assignment thing, it brings
Right.
the entire thing in there with you. First of all, getting in kind of a rhythm from module to module, and then kind of designing it in a way that chunks it for students in comprehensive, comprehensible little packets.
That's great advice, and I think that's you find ways to do that and adapt to the tool that you're using, right? Like you said, D2L has some growth, but you kind of find some ways to make it work for you and the students. And
I'm still waiting on this one day, right? Like, the way I do mine now is I just have each module just immediately has one and only one like
right.
web page, and then within that web page I can design the HTML to link out. What you lose in that though is you lose the little like status tracker,
right.
which actually is a helpful feature of D2L, and it can tell you, how far along in the module how much you've completed of the module and of the course. And you lose that when you have to link out to something else. So
right.
if there's a way to get an attractive kind of web page design on the actual module page, I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Well, no promises, but we'll make some calls. We'll see what we can do. So
sounds good. Well, you've only had to move 4,000 instructors online in the past like 2 years or something.
Yeah. Yeah. There's been some additional challenges on top of everything, but we're getting there. So we're working with it. Awesome. Well, thank you again for joining us today. I really think this was an enlightening conversation, and enjoyable to hear from the faculty side of things. I think we've mostly had instructional designers join us, and so it's nice to get a little bit from the other side there.
It's been a pleasure talking.
Audience.
Yeah, been an absolute pleasure talking with you guys. Shout out to all the other faculty. They don't bite. It's a wonderful team to work with. Really, I guess what I would say is kind of regardless of where you are on the spectrum, right? Like if you've never taught an online course, absolutely get in there and see them. And even if like all you do is online course teaching, the kind of exposure you get to all the different things happening across campus is super useful.
Awesome. Thank you for that. We appreciate it. Dr. Rob Steffen, everybody, thank you for listening, and we will, see you all next month.
All right. Well, thanks so much for having me.
The Futures of Digital Learning podcast is a production of the University of Arizona University Center for Assessment, Teaching, and Technology. If you have any questions, comments, or ideas you'd like to share with our office, go to the Contact Us link on our website, ucatt.arizona.edu.